So what even is consciousness? Where does our sense of reality actually come from? For centuries, the go-to answer has been that the brain creates it all. Like a supercomputer running a complex simulation just for you. But what if that's completely backwards? What if the brain's main job isn't to build reality, but to protect us from too much of it? To really get our heads around that, we need to see what happens when that built-in filter gets turned down.
When you think about something mind-expanding, you probably have a pretty simple idea of how it works. It must just crank up all the activity in your brain, right? More lights on, more signals firing, more experience. It just makes intuitive sense that to see more, you have to turn the volume on the brain way, way up. But as it turns out, the science points to something much, much stranger.
And this is where things get really fascinating. Groundbreaking studies, like one back in 2012 on psilocybin, found the total opposite of what everyone expected. Instead of the brain lighting up like a Christmas tree, researchers saw big decreases in brain activity. And here's the real kicker. The more the brain activity went down, the more intense and profound the experience was for the person. So, less brain activity equals more experience. How on earth is that possible?
This really presents us with a huge paradox. If shutting parts of the brain down leads to a richer, wider, more expansive sense of consciousness, then our whole model of the brain as this simple generator of reality, it starts to look a little shaky. It forces us to ask a much, much deeper question about what the mind actually is.
And this leads us to a pretty radical idea, the filter hypothesis. Thinkers like Bernardo Kastrup have really pushed this forward. And the theory goes something like this. The brain doesn't produce consciousness at all. Instead, its main job is to act like a complex filter. It takes this huge, overwhelming, maybe even universal consciousness and dials it way, way down to the tiny trickle of information we need to, survive day to day.
And this idea isn't even new. Long before we had fancy brain scans, the author Aldous Huxley came up with this brilliant metaphor for it. He called the brain a cerebral reducing valve. His argument was that for us to be able to focus on the basics, like finding lunch and not becoming lunch, our brain has to filter out almost everything else. This vast reality that might be, as he put it, biologically useless but spiritually massive.
Okay, so if the brain really is a filter, what happens when we pry it open for a little while? What kind of stuff starts seeping through the cracks when that reducing valve is loosened?
Well, people who go there tend to report a remarkably consistent set of things. The ego, our feeling of being a separate me, it starts to dissolve. And that leads to this incredible feeling of unity, this deep knowing that all is in all, as Huxley said. And weirdly, these states aren't described as being fake or like a dream. People often say they feel more real than real. Your senses are flooded with visionary beauty. And sometimes, people even report things that feel a lot like extrasensory perception.
And this whole effect isn't just a solo journey. It can be profoundly social. When people go through this kind of experience together, it can spark something called communitas. It's a term from anthropology that describes this state of intense shared humanity, where all the usual social rules and hierarchies just melt away, and what's left is this raw, powerful sense of togetherness. And this isn't just some fuzzy feeling. You can actually measure the effects. Research shows that while these experiences can boost psychological well-being pretty much anywhere, people who take part in guided group ceremonies report way bigger and longer-lasting benefits. One study actually found the jump in well-being was up to twice as high in these collective settings. It suggests that sharing this unfiltered experience actually makes its positive impact even stronger.
The sheer power of these experiences and our growing ability to tweak the brain with all sorts of new technology raises some really urgent questions. This isn't just philosophy anymore. This has real-world legal and ethical implications that we have to grapple with in the 21st century.
And that brings us to this emerging idea of cognitive liberty. It's pretty straightforward, really. It's the idea that you and only you have the right to control your own mind. It's like freedom of thought, but updated for an age where our brains are no longer a black box. It's all about mental self-determination.
Cognitive liberty basically stands on two main pillars. First, you have the right to be protected, a shield if you will. It's the right to keep anyone from messing with your mind or reading your thoughts without your permission. But second, you have the right to choose. Let's call that the sword. It's the freedom to decide for yourself if you want to alter or enhance your own consciousness, as long as you're not hurting anyone else.
So this model of consciousness, this idea of the brain as a filter for a much bigger reality,
Well, it opens up some seriously mind-bending possibilities. It makes us look again at parts of our own biology and experiences that have always been wrapped in a whole lot of mystery.
For centuries, some of the greatest thinkers have been absolutely fascinated by one tiny little part of the brain, the pineal gland. The philosopher René Descartes, for example, famously called it the principal seat of the soul. He thought this tiny, pea-sized gland was the literal meeting point between our physical body and our non-physical mind.
Now what's amazing is that modern science knows the pineal gland sits right in the geometric center of the brain, and we know it produces melatonin to control our sleep. But here's where it gets truly wild. It also produces DMT, one of the most powerful psychedelic compounds known to exist, and it's being made right inside our own heads. This has led a lot of people to wonder what role it plays in really profound states of consciousness, like birth, dreaming, or near-death experiences.
So while we can clearly map out its job in our daily biological rhythms, like you see here, this whole filter hypothesis really makes you wonder, could its function go so much deeper? Could the pineal gland be a key part of that reducing valve itself, a sort of biological gateway between our little mind and a much bigger consciousness?
And look, this isn't all just ancient speculation. Some really cutting-edge, though definitely still preliminary research, is looking into things that just don't fit our old model of separate minds. For example, some studies using advanced brain scans have actually reported synchronized patterns of brain activity between two people who are trying to communicate telepathically in a lab. It's a hint that maybe, when that filter is lowered, our minds are far more connected than we ever thought possible.
Which brings us to the biggest question of all. If our brains evolved to show us just a tiny, edited-for-survival sliver of reality, and if we're now finding the keys that can temporarily open that filter, what in the world is on the other side? What are we not seeing every single minute of every single day?